All right, it is 12 o'clock. Kia ora everyone, and welcome to our webinar on how to future-proof your business with digital product passports. I'm your host, Prasanna Nara, Engagement Manager at Eco Choice Aotearoa, and we're very excited to bring you this webinar in partnership with GS1 New Zealand. So thank you for being here. We'll start off with a short mihi, and I invite you to say this with me, even if you're on mute. Kei ngā maunga whakakahi, kei ngā wai tukukiri, kei ngā mātawaka o te motu, ka nui te mihi. To those who connect to the mountains, the rivers, and the oceans across the land, hello and welcome to you. So before we get into it, a couple of housekeeping. You are on mute, but don't worry, you'll be allowed to unmute yourself and ask us questions at the end of the session. You can also pop any questions you have into the chat box if you don't have a mic. You will receive a recording of this webinar and any resources that we mention, including these slides. All right, so today we're going to hear from three incredible speakers, starting with Daniel Street, Sustainability and ESG Lead at DLA Piper, a global law firm in over 40 countries, which provides legal solutions to businesses worldwide. Daniel is a leading expert in climate governance and ESG law, advising boards and executives on disclosure obligations, greenwashing risks, and strategic risk management. I highly recommend giving Daniel a follow on LinkedIn because he's got some incredible thought leadership pieces and weekly news wrap-ups. Next, we're going to hear from my boss, Laura Gemmell, CEO at Eco Choice Aotearoa. So Eco Choice is New Zealand's official eco label for products and services. We've been operating for more than 30 years, trademarked by the Ministry for the Environment, but we operate as a non-profit. So the eco label is earned through third-party audits, following strict ISO 14024 guidelines. But aside from environmental impact, we also look at human health impacts, fitness for purpose, and we're phasing in social accountability criteria into our standards as well. We operate on the basis of full transparency, so you can find all of our standards on our website, and we encourage public feedback whenever we update those standards. And finally, we'll hear from Peter Stevens, CEO of GS1 New Zealand, best known for the ubiquitous barcode on products and the New Zealand business number. GS1 New Zealand is New Zealand's largest standards body with 8,000 more members. They're also part of the global GS1 Federation in more than 100 countries. GS1 provides Kiwi business standards and services related to identification, automatic data capture, and data sharing, such as the 2D barcodes, which we will learn more about later. And fun fact, most of our Eco Choice Eco Label partners are also GS1 members. So huge thanks to our speakers for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. So today's session will be split into three main parts. Daniel will take us through upcoming regulations on product transparency and green claims. Then Laura will take us through what product transparency looks like and how lifecycle certification can help your business verify its sustainability claims. And finally, Peter will show us how 2D barcoding helps your products speak for themselves and stay competitive in the market. So before I hand over to Daniel, just a little introduction on the topic. So we've really seen a growing demand for transparency and traceability on a product level. And what we're finding is consumers don't just want to know if the products they're buying have a positive impact. They also want to see businesses authenticate their claims at the point of sale and be transparent about the claims that they're actually making. Meanwhile, we're seeing regulators tightening rules on transparency, and in response, we're seeing export markets shifting to meet these standards. The problem is New Zealand businesses are still playing catch up. So a 2024 survey conducted by KPMG found that among the 100 largest entities in New Zealand, only 57 companies are reporting on their sustainability performance. In comparison, our trading partners in Australia, Japan, South Korea, UK, China, and US have about 80 to 100% of their large companies providing reports. Of those 57 companies, less than 25% have their sustainability data independently assured. So we know that product traceability can be quite a tricky thing to manage for businesses. Like, we definitely recognize that, especially if you've got complex supply chains, which many of the larger businesses today have. But the reason that we decided to embark on this wonderful partnership with GS1 was so we can help businesses really make their sustainability information more accessible while providing the assurance that the claims businesses are making about their product are independently verified. All right, that being said, I'm going to hand over to Daniel to give us a lay of the land and a global overview of what's to come with the shift of regulation.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that very kind introduction. What I'm going to do is I'll share my presentation now.
Yes.
And here we go. So hopefully this comes through.
Yep, looks good.
Excellent. So in sort of next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to cover what is very much a rapidly changing landscape for sustainability standards, product traceability, sustainability claims, environmental and supply chain due diligence across the world. And how do we, as businesses sitting in New Zealand, either as exporters or dealing with our domestic market, deal with these shifting regulatory trends, and how can we take no regrets actions and best practice approaches to get our businesses in the best place that they can be to deal with the sort of conflicting regulatory picture that we are facing. So as I've been going around town saying for much of this year, it's very messy out there in terms of the state of where ESG and sustainability regulation is, for a whole range of geopolitical, economic, and political reasons across the world. It's a tough time, and people are considering, where do we go with sustainability regulations, and have we got the right balance between regulation, compliance, economic growth, etc. So with that messy picture, there are sort of a number of key trends that you can see looking internationally. One is that we're seeing increased fragmentation. So if you were to go back a couple of years, we would say that we had international consensus. We had a range of initiatives in Europe, in the US at a federal level, across APAC led by China, across Australia and others, where we're getting increased coordination and alignment around a number of these issues. In the last 2 years, that has largely blown apart, and we've got a series of different trading blocks with different approaches to how they're taking sustainability regulation going forward. What we're seeing also is that because many of these initiatives have been the result of years of political change and influence, we're now getting this sudden feeling of whiplash and uncertainty. Like, you look at the European Union, you think of the strong amount of effort that went into preparing for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, or the Corporate Sustainability Supply Chain Due Diligence Directive, CSDDD. And that was years worth of fine negotiation to get to a point that everybody could agree. And now that you've reopened that, there's a massive amount of uncertainty about where those landmark sort of regulatory efforts will ultimately land once they go through the renegotiation process. But underlying the sort of political and regulatory landscape, there is still strong underlying consumer and customer incentives for increased sustainability reporting, disclosure, verification, assurance. So at the end of the day, the ultimate consumers are wanting more. They're wanting more detail. They're wanting information that they can trust. And so that trend has not changed. That trend is still there. And so whilst we see the sort of a wobble in the line of growth of sustainability regulation and reporting requirements, there might be a slight dip, but it's not going back anywhere far, and it will pick up again soon. So we are seeing those underlying trends holding steady. So if we do a quick whip around the sort of major trading partners, so if we look at the US climate regulation environment, we've got a sharp reversal of federal efforts, certainly in relation to climate reporting, but then in other areas like food safety and others, they've got a number of very important regulations and regulatory efforts at the federal level which are staying in place. We have continued state level efforts in relation to sustainability and climate. You think about California, New York, Colorado, but there's also New Jersey. There's a whole range of other states which are picking this up as well. And this is largely the impact of the sort of international impacts of geopolitics, multilateralism, and the sort of impacts that we've been talking about so far. If we come across into Europe, what we're seeing at a European Union level is this challenge of regulation and being a leader to get the EU's green agenda, Green New Deal, but also dealing with stalling economic growth. And how does the European Union continue to drive economic growth when it is facing the sort of challenges of a slowing APAC, but also then the US seeing any efforts on sustainability as being a sort of barrier to trade or a barrier or a sort of non-trade barrier to US companies. And so how do they balance that? What we are seeing is a very much a politically and economically driven retrenchment and reassessment of the regulatory landscape, but we're not seeing any widespread abandonment of the EU's green goals and the ultimate commitment to the net zero transition. So that was still there. I'm going to just touch on a couple of the EU regulations that are relevant here and what we're going to be talking about. One is the Eco Design Regulation, which is the foundation for the digital passport or digital product passport scheme that we're going to be touching on in more detail. So this being a centralized digital repository, providing stakeholders with essential product sustainability and circularity information. So effectively a digital identity card for your product, which covers components, materials, gives you detailed information on the supply chain and allows verification of compliance with legal obligations. It will cover things like environmental and carbon footprints and a whole range of other things. So that is one very key part that we're going to talk about today. There's two others that I'm going to touch on. So one is the Green Claims Directive. So the Green Claims Directive was well on the way of its journey to coming into force, but has been paused as part of the Omnibus review. And it was paused back in June, so it's sort of under further consideration. But that directive, if it comes in, will require extensive and comprehensive substantiation for environmental claims. It will require third-party verification of those claims reviewed every 5 years. It will require use of relevant ISO standards and comprehensive life cycle assessments and extensive third-party verification schemes. In particular around sustainability labels, eco labels have to meet a whole range of particular requirements in order to be used. And so that is on pause, but there's no suggestion that that is going to be completely removed. And it has what people often think of as a sort of sister greenwashing directive, which is in force and is in play. And whilst it doesn't go into the same level of detail as the Green Claims Directive, also has a whole range of requirements on anyone wanting to sell products into the EU that basically requires extensive substantiation of green claims that are made. And that you've got to be able to demonstrate it. You've got to have widely recognized scientific evidence backing up your claims if you want to make those. And again, statements have to be verified, certified by applicable third-party bodies. Another thing I was going to touch on was the UK. So the UK is very much still going full steam ahead on net zero and on green growth. They, from a regulatory perspective, take a different approach from the EU, so it's not very prescriptive. Their green claims approach and their regulation in this space is very much principles based. So they require substantiation, but they're not going to specify a whole range of different ways of doing it. So in terms of if you're thinking as an exporter and how you're doing it, you have more freedom as to how you to achieve it, but ultimately the goal of substantiation is still very much there. And the UK have recently increase the level of penalties that they will require or potentially able to impose on organisations that fall foul of their green claims approach. Those fines have now been increased to up to a potential 10% of annual turnover. So it's a real meaningful potential financial penalty now. Going away from Europe and looking across at APAC, it's very much a growth area of climate regulation. We're not seeing much in the way of climate reporting, though it is growing. There's a strong regional focus on waste packaging, and you go to some of the jurisdictions, I'm thinking India and some of the others, where they've got strong extended producer responsibility and waste rules. So a lot of the requirements of emissions disclosure and packaging requirements comes through those extended producer responsibility obligations. It's very much a nascent area for greenwashing. In terms of a sort of final slide to try and pull these threads together, what we're seeing is whilst there's debates around how quickly we go, how fast, how detailed, there is a consensus largely around the mosaic, what I call the sort of mosaic of sustainability and ESG regulations. So we have the reporting requirements are still there. We have claims in relation to, or laws in relation to green claims and substantiation. We have increased growth of supply chain due diligence laws, and that includes things like modern slavery, but also includes things like the deforestation regulations out of the EU, transposed into German law and French law, which require a whole range of traceability into the supply chain to make sure that goods are not coming from areas that are deforested. You have packaging requirements, extended producer responsibility, PFAS, governance laws. So what we are seeing is a consistent tapestry of the kinds of laws that apply in each of our major markets externally. And if we close by bringing it back into the New Zealand context, we've had a lot of discussion about New Zealand's modern slavery laws. We've also had extensive discussion about our climate reporting laws and whether we've got the right balance. But the thing from an advertising perspective is that from a New Zealand perspective, we've always had a requirement to substantiate claims. And again, we take a similar approach to the UK, which is that it's not highly prescriptive and detailed. But if you are going to make green claims in the New Zealand market, especially in relation to environmental compliance, net zero targets, your emission footprint, then they need to be verified, third-party certified, and backed up with detailed substantiation. So that's all I was going to say. So hopefully that sets the scene for the rest of the panel and the rest of the discussion that we're going to have today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Daniel. And just before we move on to Laura, I just had a question. So I think most of us know that recently Kmart was sort of given a warning by the Commerce Commission on their claims of 100% sourced, sustainably sourced cotton. How could supply chain transparency, have prevented this sort of overview of what the Better Cotton Initiative stated?
Yeah, it certainly could have fixed it. Like the Kmart example is a classic one of a claim that is made that doesn't have a process to back it up. And it should have been apparent within Kmart from the day that they were making that claim, in that if you're going out and saying it's 100%, but you have no process to actually check that it's 100%, and your actual process on the ground involves taking supplies from a range of different suppliers and mixing it all together into one big fat warehouse, whatever, then you just can't make that claim. So to make those kinds of claims, you have to have supply chain traceability. You need to know where everything is coming into the supply chain and track everything. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, which leads us into Laura's portion. So Laura, you're going to share with us about what product transparency actually looks like. And yeah, feel free to take it away.
Fantastic. So kia ora, everyone. Thank you so much for joining all of us today. I just want to do the classic, can you see my slides check? You can? Perfect. Daniel had some beautiful visuals, and I've got memes, so there we go. I guess, look, we understand at Eco Choice how overwhelming it can be for businesses to navigate the growing number of global requirements. We're in the same boat to a certain degree. At Eco Choice, we make it's our job to make sure we're across all of these developments, and that we're making sure that our product standards, we're shaping them accordingly. And the reason we do that is to help businesses really stay ahead and be confident in their sustainability journeys. I think your confidence can waver a little bit when there's things coming at you from all angles. So that's something that we're working on, and certainly part of our job. I think it's important to sort of remind ourselves about why sustainability and transparency are important beyond regulation. For businesses, focus solely on New Zealand, domestic regulation isn't really something that you need to be worried about at the moment. That pressure is obviously falling more to our exporters, as Daniel sort of alluded to. But that doesn't mean that sustainability and transparency shouldn't be on your priority list. I think something that people often forget is, even if you operate only domestically, are you part of a supply chain that exports? If you are, then overseas sustainability and transparency requirements, could very much still have a direct impact on you. And beyond regulation, there's plenty of market insight that should prompt some action. Take investors, for example. According to PwC, 86% of Kiwi investors want companies to embed environmental, social, and governance factors into their corporate strategies. And there's financial advantages too. In 2021 alone, New Zealand banks provided $3.3 billion in sustainable finance, and that money wasn't sitting in some kind of honesty box. Businesses had to prove their sustainability credentials and provide transparency into their operations in order to access that. When we talk about supply chain transparency, this is what we mean. And the thing I love about this graphic is that it pretty much mirrors the life cycle approach that Type 1 eco labels like Eco Choice take. And it's all about the traceability throughout the life cycle of the product. Transparency doesn't mean giving away your IP. I think that's something to be really clear about. It's about verifying practices and impacts, and not necessarily revealing your proprietary processes and formulas. And there are a heap of companies that are already doing this while protecting their trade secrets. They're still demonstrating things like responsible sourcing and ethical labor and environmental compliance. I think transparency is really about building trust, not exposing the blueprint of your business. And another benefit is that it really raises the expectations across your entire industry. If you're a leader in this space, it drives higher standards, which ultimately deliver better outcomes for both people and the planet. So, how do businesses demonstrate credibility in this space to both customers and regulators? And what will not be a surprise to anyone, my answer to that is trusted certifications. ISO, so the International Standards Organization, or International Organization for Standardization, I don't really know how that acronym works, has categorized product-specific sustainability certifications as Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3. So to help you sort of understand what might be the most relevant for your business, a Type 1, which Eco Choice is part of, is known as a life cycle eco label. So it really provides the highest level of assurance by looking at every aspect of that life cycle, while, as Prasanna mentioned earlier, also considering impacts to human health and taking that science-based approach. Type 2 claims generally focus on a single attribute, such as recyclability or compostability. And these claims can be self-declared as long as they're substantiated, or they can be verified by a third party. The challenge with Type 2 claims is that this is often where greenwashing occurs. A company might highlight, say, one positive attribute of their product, but that claim doesn't necessarily address the most significant environmental impact. That's when it kind of veers into that greenwashing territory. And then we've got Type 3 claims. This is where environmental product declarations, or EPDs, come in. These are really comprehensive, highly transparent technical reports. They're very much aimed at a B2B audience who know how to extract the information they need from them. The drawback with EPDs is that they're quite expensive, and they don't actually tell you if the product is good or bad. You need to comb through that information and come to your own conclusion. So each of these different types of certifications, they have their place, and it's just about knowing, again, what is the best fit for your business. So Peter will appreciate this graphic. I hope I've put it there, especially for you. On more than one occasion, Peter has compared keeping up with all of these new regulations as a game of whack-a-mole. And I think that is right on the money. And if that's something that you can relate to as well, and your aim is to really future-proof your business while offering a high level of assurance to customers and regulators, then a Type 1 life cycle certification really is your best bet. As you can see, it's multi-criteria. I ran out of space. There's a few more things that we check off as well. And look, I get it. Its comprehensiveness can feel daunting at first, especially if you're an SME. And that's why all of our product standards are freely available online. So you can begin working towards certification at your own pace, or simply use them as a guide. While we would love for everyone to get certified, really our bigger objective is to see more businesses operate more sustainably. And that's why we're comfortable giving our IP away. And for us, it's really about walking the talk on sustainability and transparency. So our partnership with GS1, which I'm very excited for Peter to talk about in just a minute, is really an extension of that commitment around sustainability and transparency and accessibility as well, right? You can be transparent without making the information particularly accessible. So that's a really important point. This initiative between Eco Choice and GS1 is really about making it easier for businesses to meet the growing demand for credible, accessible information. Digital traceability is obviously gaining momentum internationally. We've got ISO exploring a standard for digital product passports now. They are not the most, they're a slow-moving beast, so goodness knows when that will actually eventuate, but we can't really hang around and wait for them, but we can adapt when those guidelines emerge. And I think Daniel might have mentioned as well, the EU will begin phasing in requirements around digital product passports from next year in certain categories. This partnership is going to see Eco Choice work on the behalf of businesses that have certified products to provide verified sustainability data to GS1, who will then make it really easily accessible through a QR code. So Peter, I will hand over to you now to demonstrate just how this works. Thank you, everyone.
Sure, thank you, Laura and Daniel, for that. As I said, my part of the talk, we're a standards body, is really talking about how products can talk for themselves, and it's trying to link together sustainability, product substantiation, and a way of consumers and regulators and other partners access information. So let's just start off with some definitions, because I'm aware that already in the presentation there's been a couple of different definitions used. Traceability is something we've been doing for a long time. In fact, it's often required to export a product. You know, you're required to show to a regulator or to such as MPI that you can trace your product, and that's really about history. It's about history. It's looking backwards. You know, where has my product been? Who has handled it? And where should it be right now? So that's a traceability requirement. And we do that sort of okay in New Zealand, but actually typically in industry verticals, we don't do it across every as a systematic way, unlike some countries. But linked to traceability is increasingly the word visibility. And visibility is a much more holistic view of your supply chain, of the total supply chain. You know, and it can answer questions like this: where are my raw materials? Where are my packaging components? How much is available? So in other words, it's not saying where has this particular item been, historical sense. It could also answer where is it destined to be at a future date? And is it heading to the right destination? So it's trying to get a visibility about your product. So that's another linked concept that you'll see used in guidelines and standards. And the third area is increasingly a terminology that you'll see called transparency, often associated with products. You know, we've heard it already, Laura, talk about modern slavery, and transparency is often used around that as well. But actually, I best think of it as a bit like a double click on the life of a product, saying, tell me about this particular item. And, what's the transparency and perhaps the claims and assurances related to that. So clearly transparency as a concept seems reasonably clear, but it's fundamentally dependent on the data. It's not just about the product master data, in other words, what is the product made from and the claims, but perhaps it could be much more dynamic. So an example of that to make it clear for you could be these sort of questions. Does this food contain any allergens? Was it sustainably produced? What certifications does this product have? How do I safely recycle this particular product? Now, interestingly, when you start getting into this, you're starting to talk about the particular product you have in your hand as distinct from a generic product from a particular brand owner, because clearly, as we know, many products are manufactured in multiple locations. They could be labelled as a product from a particular brand owner, but actually they could have different ingredients that don't hit the level that requires to be designated on a label. But sometimes the very fine details are important around things like recyclability or indeed the certification. So just talk to people that are interested in halal certification, for example. It's really, really important that this particular product was produced when this halal certification was actually extant by the brand owner. So it's much more complicated. So transparency is the game where Daniel and Laura have been talking about going to. In fact, the UN talks about transparency a lot, transparency protocol even. So to do these different things, traceability, visibility, enhanced visibility, and transparency, clearly we have to find some way of imagining a connection, because actually the connections between the different parties that are involved in moving a product from its origins or ingredients right through to a finished product can be very complicated. I've just put up a honey one on the right hand side, partly because the chairman of GS1 that is my boss actually is from a honey exporter. But answering the questions on the left is really quite tricky. What route are these raw materials taken? Can I reduce my carbon footprint? You need to connect this together, and particularly if we're dealing with a consumer or a buyer in an overseas product. Some of the things, particularly eco choice and sustainability and carbon, are additive. As they move down a supply chain, the different components of that carbon footprint must be added together. So it's much, much more complicated and is exercising a lot of people's minds at the moment. So what I'm going to do is ask you to pull out your cell phone and just have a crack at this demo product and just pick up and scan the product that's on screen there, the barcode. You will see on the left-hand side the linear barcode that you've known about us for 50 years. GS1 brought the barcode to the world 50 odd years ago. And that one you won't be able to see on your cell phone at all. But ironically, the one on the right is a next generation barcode, and this has been in the works for about 10 years. You will know it as a QR code. You'll see it's probably, you'll say, oh, that's a QR code. It's a different one. In fact, this is a brand for a particular product range that's coming out driven by the fast moving consumer goods in Australasia, driven by the Australian Food and Grocery Council and the New Zealand Food and Grocery Council, called SmartFacts, and it's trying to give a standardized approach to information that consumers want to know. So hopefully you should be able to scan that and see about what this bottle of orange is, and you'll see. So this is an example of a next generation GS1 barcode. So let's just make sure we know what's going on here. The 50-year one on the left is the one that doesn't do anything and your cell phone won't see. The next generation actually is called a digital GS1 QR with digital link. What's the digital link all about? Well, actually, we need to explain that a bit more. So embedded in this QR code is not just a link to our website, which is what you've seen. Actually, embedded in this is the ability for the product to go beep at the point of sale. Literally, it goes beep, just like when the scanners are turned on, and we've been working for almost a decade to make sure that scanners at the point of sale will see these things and read them, but also get enhanced data, including things like production date, could be a batch, serial number, or date about the product. So that's the beep part of it. But also, we have the ability to scan, as you've just done, where actually you can find out product data that is provided by the brand owner, and that's delivered via the web, the digital link. That could be brand and product information, regulatory information, offers even, sustainability and recycling and claims. So this is not a simple QR code. It does two things simultaneously. On the left-hand side, it allows the product to be sold and can reduce things like wastage. In fact, Woolworths New Zealand and Woolworths Australia are publicly stating that's reducing food waste, where it's being deployed by 40%, two-dimensional barcodes at the moment for them. On the right, it actually enables a connection to a consumer to offer a story about the product and verification of a claim. So let's try something that's closer to Laura's world. This is a current licensee. This is a test. So if you could please take your phone up and scan that particular QR code, you'll find something that's been set up as a demonstration that enables Office Dulux product. The GTIN is global trade item number. That is the barcode number that you would know, and that's embedded in it. But also what you'll see is a whole lot of information that can be provided in this particular case from Dulux about what the product can do, its claims, its substantiation. Even if required, you could get into doing things like verified credentials, which is a cryptographic way of providing certificates and connecting back to Eco Choice to verify that claim. And this is under the control of the brand owner. Although please note, in some parts of the world, the information may be dictated and required by a regulator. So what's the link to digital product passports? Well, actually, I suppose I would say this, but the identification of everything makes anything possible, because actually life cycle analysis, really you need to know what you're dealing with at different cycles, as you've heard from Laura. Well, you've already heard from Daniel that there are competing frameworks for things like digital product passports. The EU has got one variant. They were the first mover. ISO are working on trying to put together a standard for that internationally. As you've heard from Laura, it's taking time. China is moving very fast and wishes to put out their own framework for digital product passports. And the US is also trying to work out what it's going to do. But regulations around these things are proceeding by product verticals: batteries, building, construction, apparel, food, and you can check out some attempt around sustainability there. So, and finally, around 2D barcoding, it's here now already. It's already rolling out globally. I think if you're a member of GS1, it's appropriate to learn about it, plan, potentially start piloting, small, implement scaling. Clearly, if you're a licensee of Eco Choice, there are some things that you know consumers may be interested, or buyers that you could link directly to off the product if you so wish. So please, that's all I have to say today, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. Back to you, Laura Prasanna.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. And a shout out to Dulux for working with us on that digital link QR code that you scanned. So we've got a question from Emma Wheeler for you, Peter. Are we seeing much GS1 digital link being used in New Zealand? I've seen it quite a bit in Australia and the US, but how are we tracking it in New Zealand? It's a great tool to use for brands to communicate.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It's a great question, and thank you very much, Anna. Look, I think we would like to see it moving faster than what we are now. I think that in the food space, the two big retailers are doing capacity building now and actually getting ready. Their computers largely are ready to be able to read two-dimensional barcodes. And in fact, you can see it with Woolworths now. As I mentioned before, their meat, they're progressively rolling it out through their meat and produce. You will see it appear. In other sectors, the retailer scanning at the point of sale is probably not going to come as early as brand owners being able to use it to tell a story now, which can be done now. But realistically, with a brand owner, until your slowest trading partner moves, you won't be able to eliminate the old linear barcode, the zebra one, so most people are going to end up with two on, which is typically what's happening globally. Right. But interesting question. Thank you.
All right. So the Q&A is open now. Everyone should have control over your mic, so if you want to come off mute, feel free to do so. We've also got another question. How can I find out more about the product QR code, such as cost or product information required? I guess that's again to you, Peter.
Look, if you're an existing GS1 member, then you will already have the linear barcode on. And so in principle, there is no cost to make the change other than putting it on your packaging. So, you know, the people that we're working at the moment, they are looking at how they can walk before they run. So that could be something as simple as putting a 2D barcode on, which has a digital link to their website, or indeed their product page. But obviously, once you start getting into this, you may want to do a bit more than that, because you may want to put into the left-hand side, what I call the beep part, production date. And that's what most people want to do. They want to do a production date or best before date or a serial number. That does mean that you need to find a way of putting the production data into the barcode at the time it's produced. So if it's on a line, then production line, then that's a bit tricky. What some people are doing is moving to where they are individually stickering on. That's pretty simple to do. So yeah, so the challenge is really what you want to provide. If you want to provide the claims information that we were talking about before, that's fundamentally in linking to your website or even indeed a solution provider to provide information. But what I would encourage you to do is to think carefully about how you provide that information. Providing a link to a 50-page PDF, this instruction manual, is really not what people want. It will meet some Building Act requirements, you know, the Building Product Information requirements, but fundamentally what people often want to know is, how do I use it? Tell me what to do. So part of the art of this is trying to work out what it is that people want to see straight off the product, either pre-purchase or after purchase.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. John, feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, hi, John Lau from Canon. I have two questions. The first one, you mentioned in one of the slide deck, yeah, there was the type 1 eco label under ISO 14024, and you have the eco mark, eco choice, the gecko label. What about the EPEAT label? Now, I know the EPEAT label is widely accepted as a type 1, but I'm not sure in terms of certification-wise whether it is a type 1. But EPEAT obviously is an American certification process that we are well aware of, and Canon is EPEAT certified. We're also Eco Choice certified in New Zealand. So I'm just wondering, will EPEAT be accepted under that type 1 requirement? Because I saw you've got a whole lot of labels in there, but I didn't see EPEAT.
I can take this one, Prasanna and John. Great question. And the reason you didn't see it there is I just couldn't fit it on to that slide, to be honest. So Eco Choice and most of those other labels that we had under the Type 1 category are all part of something called the Global Eco Labeling Network, which is a membership organisation. EPEAT is part of that, and so is TCO Development. So those are the two sort of global ICT certifiers. So they are Type 1 eco labels for sure. They are obviously sector specific, but absolutely follow the same sorts of processes and guidelines. So they definitely fall into that category.
Right, thank you. And the second question, I presume, and I'm thinking maybe not. So from Canon perspective, you know, you have your standard under the Eco Choices EC 2417, which looks at the multifunction devices and the standard that's required in New Zealand under the Eco Choice requirement. So am I thinking is that will this standard be adjusted to include this particular requirement for digital passports for multifunction devices in the future?
Not at this stage. This is kind of, I guess, an optional extra. It's you know, something that the businesses can opt in and out of. We're not going to make it a part of our standards at this point. Our eco label is really about, you know, over and above regulatory requirements. So if this is something that is required overseas, then it's sort of a bit of, we categorize it as BAU. We're just working with GS1 to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for you guys to be able to provide the information that's needed. So it is unlikely it will be, you know, we're not going to make it mandatory, but it's certainly something, if you want to get ahead of the curve, a good thing to be looking at right now.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. I think Luke Tierney from Hempel probably had the same question, but you might have already answered that. Yeah, if anyone else has a question, feel free to raise your hand and shout it out.
What I would add, perhaps just linked off Luke's question in the chat, is ironically across different product categories and different markets, we're seeing different things that are coming up. And the reason why I use the word whack-a-mole lots of times with Laura is that the direction of travel, I think, is what you should all get your head of. There's people from all different sectors here, is the direction of travel is really clear. Across, regardless of it's food, building, construction products, healthcare products, multifunctional devices even, is over a 10-year period, the requirements to substantiate claims just are inexorable. As Daniel said, sometimes we see it walk back a bit, but actually when you look at it in a decade, it's really clear. And I think the key thing for your business, let alone your sector, or indeed New Zealand, is to think, what is our play? How do we do this in a scalable way and provide the sort of substantiation of our products that we can see either as required now or coming? So please think about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we've got a question from Susan. Oh, we might have lost Susan. Oh, we'll just.
Oh, she's just popped back.
I also think it's probably worth adding that for Eco Choice, Eco Label partners, it doesn't come at an additional cost for you to work with GS1 to get those barcodes up and running. So that's kind of what our partnership is about. But I guess, Peter, what are some of the other costs to think about in terms of effort, like you said, compiling that information and also putting it in a way that people that's presentable for consumers?
Look, I think the first thing for most brand owners that are on the call to think about is you've typically got you may have a GS1 barcode on your product already. It's really thinking, do you want to have some engagement with a consumer and provide some more evidence that's available off the products talking for themselves? If the answer to that question is yes, then the next thing to do is to think, okay, what would I possibly want to provide? And I think most people, as I said, walk and jog and run is probably the best way of thinking about that, because if you go straight to run, you're getting into quite a lot of complexity and potentially cost of changing the way you produce product before it goes to the market. And I think that may be a bit premature, because actually you want to learn about what the interaction is, because after all, once you're driving people directly off the product to your website, for example, you will be able to see where the people are, what questions they're asking, because actually you're just dealing on the web. But you know that it's coming off the product. So the product is literally in someone's hand. So just think, how could you use that and learn by doing and stage it? And that's what we're seeing. Probably the most progressive jurisdiction we've seen, surprisingly, is Brazil. Brazil has just gone great guns, but across the product range with this, because consumers are really into finding out stuff off the product. But India, for example, the regulator moved on pesticides to require digital labeling quite a few years ago. Why? Because actually the one thing that most farmers in India had, apart from potentially the only link as language, as English, was actually they had a phone, and the ability for an agricultural chemical or pesticide to be shown how to be applied and mixed properly was actually more important. So it was the link to demonstrate how the product should be used rather than lots of technical documentation that was seen by the Indian regulators as the reason for regulating digital labeling.
All right. I think we've just got Susan back. Susan, do you want to ask your question?
Sorry, I finally figured out how to unmute myself. Thank you, Peter. You've partly answered my question already. In terms of you said, what do people want to know? To what extent does GS1 do any research into what consumers, from the consumer's perspective, what they want to know? Or to what extent does GS1 offer any guidelines as to what consumers want to know, or is it entirely up to the brands to figure that out for themselves?
Good, interesting question, Susan, and I'll give you a hopefully not too complicated answer. Like the ways that you can, as a brand owner, can connect and provide some very basic information, then you can learn. But what industry has been doing under some of our global standards processes is looking at what information makes most sense in order to generate essentially the menu structures that you could see. So the Smart Facts one was an initiative out of the Australian Food and Grocery Council and GS1 Australia to try to look at food products. What do generally people, and they did quite a bit of research to work out what are the major headings that should be provided. Now that each brand owner can determine how many of those menus, if you like, that they would like to provide based on their own desires. But what they were trying to do is standardise roughly the approach and the look and feel to try to, in Australia and New Zealand, given that we have consistent labelling, a consistent look and feel.
Yeah.
The building products that we gave you is an example where what we've done is we've put up some information. We're not at all determining what that is, but what I would say is that there's been a lot of work to define that typology and is starting globally. Apparel, likewise, the apparel is looking at some very specific ways to do it and to cluster the information, what information is being required. And ironically, in this context, one of those that's very important for apparel being driven out of the European Union and the digital product passports is climate, carbon, embodied carbon. So, industry verticals are doing things differently. Batteries is another one that has its own way of framing the data up. So yeah, so Susan, can be very simple, but when you go to the run end, it could be you're really wanting to look at an industry approach.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I see a couple of hands up, but we're going to go to Harriet in the chat. Hi, Peter. Will there be any minimum product information requirements that have to be included, or is it up to the manufacturer as to what they disclose?
Look, I think Daniel may be able to trip in on this as well, because actually it depends on which digital product passport, from which jurisdiction, and what industry segment. And that's still in flux, as you heard from Daniel before. Daniel, do you want to perhaps expand on that?
Sure, I will. So that's a subject of supporting regulation underneath the eco design regulation. And as Peter says, it's dealt on a sort of product vertical level. So the regulations will cover different requirements for different products in terms of the broad categories of durability, recycling, end-of-life management, batteries, all of these. And this is very much in flux and still going through the process of shaping up how much and what is being disclosed. But there will be minimum product information requirements. They're just still being worked out.
All right. John, do you want to come online and ask your question?
Yeah, sorry, me again. You mentioned batteries. So I suppose the batteries, from a batteries perspective, we're probably looking at EV batteries and industrial batteries, right? And also energy storage batteries at this stage. From a Canon perspective, and I think with the batteries from the EU regulation, it'll be probably something greater than 2 kilowatt hours, from my understanding is, if you do go down the path looking at the digital passports for batteries. From a Canon perspective, our batteries are consumer batteries, lithium ion packs, generally around 14 to 30 watt hours. So I presume that'll definitely be out of scope at this stage, right?
Look, well, I can comment that I always position this as it's more like a Tesla battery than a AAA is the focus. I think, John, I've been on in an audience where the European Commission and the World Trade Organization had a bit of a ping pong about the battery regulations, because the European Commission made it very clear that part of the reason why they're doing this is it's good for the planet, but also it means that they only need to import the rare earth minerals once. And that sounds like a technical barrier to trade, because actually it's about preventing trade in the future. But actually, they're doing it for the right reasons, but they're focusing on the big end of town. So yes, you're right, John.
Thank you.
Sorry guys, I just wanted to quickly jump back if that was all right. I know we've got another question which we'll get to in just a second, but just on the question around minimum requirements, I think again, just to kind of reiterate, this is a real opportunity to sort of do more than that and really exhibit some strong leadership. And I think particularly from a consumer perspective, when we talk about digital product passports, I think often it's in the, I suppose, through the lens of B2B audiences. But I think the beauty of Digital Link and digital product passports is about making this information really accessible to consumers as well, and really empowering them. So if we think about things like product stewardship or repair, making that information really accessible at the moment, for people, because otherwise it's, a bit of a mess trying to find that information for yourself, but having that easily accessible. So I guess it's just that shift in mindset from minimum requirements to going beyond that is just something I wanted to pipe up and mention.
Yeah, no, I love that last point, Laura. And I think I know there are a couple more questions, but what you can do is send me an email. Most of you should have my email if you've received the invite to this webinar. And we'll be sending out the resources and other video material at the end of this. So feel free to ask your questions then, and we will send it to the team and the relevant person to answer. So with that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much again to everyone for giving up your lunch hour to be with us, and to our wonderful speakers for sharing your insights. If you're interested in third-party certification with Eco Choice, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, and we'll take you through the process. And if you're keen on exploring 2D barcodes, feel free to reach out to Peter and his team. Yes, and if you want to keep in touch with us on social media, feel free to do so. And yeah, sign up to our newsletters for more events. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great presentation. Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.